you saw there was just some footage of my DRZ doing some drifting, and also this car from Banggood, which is a rear-wheel drive drift DRZ equivalent. So I think this is called HGD1, but as per usual I'll probably get the letters the wrong way around, so I'll probably put it on screen if I have. So both of these cars are compatible with the Mini Z auto scale bodies. As you can see, both of them have got Nissan GTR shells on, one silver, one black. And the reason I've done this is to try and compare the two as closely as possible. So initially I was going to say that the Banggood car was actually cheaper, but it's not. So let's get the price out of the way. You can get a DRZ without radio gear, which is this fella here, without the shell, without the wheels, for about £103. This car from Banggood was £123 with exactly the same spec. So no radio gear, no wheels, no tyres, no body, nothing, just the basic chassis. So this is actually the more expensive car. The DRZ, the Atomic DRZ, is cheaper. So let's have a look and see some basic stats for these cars. So I've tried to match the wheelbases up and the wheel track on both cars so it's similar. If I put them side by side, you can see we've got them pretty much exactly the same. If I can line it up with the camera, there we go. And what it measures on the tape is about 71 millimeters. Okay, on the rear, yeah, about 71 on both of them. On the front, about 66, I think, on both of them. Oh, it's about 68 on the DRZ, slightly wider. Okay, that's easily correct. I was just trying to find the wheels that match up. Let's try and get the shells as equal as possible weight-wise. So with these cars, obviously they're both designed to do the same thing, which is a rear-wheel drive drift car. So having driven the DRZ before, I've had this car for nearly a year, and I have raced it on the track. I'll try and put a link to one of the videos where you can actually see it running on our track. And surprisingly, it does pretty well. Just off the bat, the main difference between these and the all-wheel drive versions, which obviously the Mini Z, the Atomic AMZ, BZ3, those cars, with it being rear-wheel drive, it's much lighter. Obviously, there's less transmission weight. Let's take the shell off this one. Okay, so servo is mounted here. There's no axle in the way. And the steering mechanism is completely different. Now, the DRZ uses like a sliding rail mechanism, and it's very efficient. You get a lot of steering angle, and there is no real slop in the setup. It's all pretty solid. And surprisingly, with very little adjustment, it's pretty good. That's an Atomic gyro, Atomic speed controller, fly sky receiver. I think that's a 6000 kV motor, and that's the only thing that's different on these two cars. I think that's got 3500 kV. But otherwise, actually, tell a lie, this has also got a Banggood brushless speed controller, the same as the one you have in the Mini Q. Otherwise, it's got a fly sky receiver as well. And the gyro is a, I don't know which brand it is, but it's a similar gyro to this one, but with a metal case. Okay, let's take the top off this one. So these cars are difficult comparatively to drift. It takes a bit more skill to get the most out of them. Now the construction, you can see with both cars, there's a lot of metal on the Banggood car, and I think that's why it costs more. The setup with the suspension is also, if I put them side by side, you can see that we've got proper shock absorbers on the DRZ, which I've filled with copper slip, which gives a nice cushion, whereas here we've just got straightforward springs on the HD1, HGD1. Now this car was very easy to build. Very easy, very straightforward. I think it only took me an hour to put it together, and that was following instructions in a different language off a YouTube video. It doesn't come with any instructions, so if you need instructions to build this, I am doing an instructional video step by step in English, but it is trickier with no instructions, but it's intuitive. It was very straightforward to put together, despite having a few parts missing, which I'll mention briefly later. This car was very difficult to put together, particularly the front block. I seem to remember it just seemed to be overly complicated. That said, I appreciate why, because the steering is that much better. Now, if I do a comparison between the steering of these cars, if I turn the steering all the way across, now the angle is there, excuse the battery leads there, but look at that. You get this play at the end. So you have to either turn down the steering angle so it still plays. No doubt someone will have a fix for this using some better arms, but at the moment that's what we've got. So that does affect the stability. Now, so let's have a quick look and see what the steering is actually like on these cars. So you have to be careful with this car because you can hit the body right quite easily. Even when you think you're clear, that slop can just be that extra. So you have to turn down the steering angle almost to stop that happening. Right, let's have a look at the DRZ now. On you go. I think we can see from there the DRZ has definitely got the faster steering rack. And it is pretty smooth. Okay. The downside to this Mini Q speed controller is that, just bear with me a second, just running them both off the same model setting. I'm just going to put the DRZ onto its correct model. There we go. Okay, so very complicated steering mechanism on the DRZ, but it works really well. I've got a lot of loose wires here that I need to tidy up. That's the gyro going crazy. But you can see it's a very neat mechanism. It's a pain to put together. Right, now let's go on to some race footage. The DRZ is very tricky, not tricky, it's more finicky to adjust. It takes a bit more messing around with to get the settings right. There's lots of things like ride height adjustment in here. You have to use a little screwdriver through there to adjust it. I haven't got one handy, but yeah, screwdriver goes through there and that adjusts the ride height. You can do the same at the back. There's some screws here that'll help you adjust that. Sorry, let's see if I can get this to the camera better so you can see. There you go, there's a silver screw inside and you go through there to get to it, and that adjusts the ride height. Okay, so lots of videos out there about the DRZ. I'm a bit of a newcomer really to drifting, full-on drifting with a rear-wheel drive. I've always used all-wheel drive, and it was a little bit of a learning experience. Some basic setup hints which I got off YouTube, which really helped, was to get the rear wheels as flat as possible. And you can see the dust on these tyres that we've got them pretty flat. So they're not cambered in or cambered out, but fairly flat. Try and do the same with the front and try and ensure that when you steer, your wheels are parallel. And that'll give you the best control with your drifting. Now on this car, to adjust all the angles, to camber the wheels in and out, you've got 2 screws here and 2 screws here that enable you to change the camber and also allow you to widen the track and narrow it. At the back you've just got 2 screws at the top underneath the receiver here, which allow you to change the camber, but you can't change the width at the back, it's set. The biggest difference in terms of what these cars are about and why I would possibly go for this car before I get into the handling is the fact that this car can be changed to any wheelbase, and it's like that out of the box. If you want to do that with the DRZ, you have to either buy a different chassis plate or the Super Skeeter chassis, which costs more than the car itself, I think. So you're doubling your outlay to be able to adjust the wheelbase. If that's your thing and you want to be able to change the wheelbase, then this is a really good buy. I've actually enjoyed being able to put different shells on. I had the Mazda shell on earlier at 90mm. This is a 94mm wheelbase. I've got a 98mm, and I've even got a BMW shell here, which is even longer, which at some point I will put on. For instance, to change the wheelbase, it is so easy. Out of any car, toy car I've had, RC car, there's 4 screws here, 4 screws here, and that enables you to change the wheelbase that easily. The whole thing just slides back. So just to show you how easy it is to convert this back to all different wheelbase lengths, I thought I'd do a quick demo. So currently it's set to this wheelbase 94, and we've got the front plate on for the GTR there. So we're going to convert it back so this will fit on, which is the Rx7. Let's undo the screws to change the wheelbase. Okay, so basically each one of these is 4mm in terms of wheelbase. So we undo all these screws. Right. That's it. That's now set to 94. Just got the screws back in. So that's now set to 90. There you go. 90. Approximately. Great. Put the screws back in. It's not going to hit the front glass. Let's try it on. Well, these wheels are probably too wide for this setup, but we're going to give it a go. Okay, there we are. It's in. Okay, slightly wider than it needs to be, but we're in. That's pushing on the glass a little bit. Just like that. Let's go test it. The one main difference to the standard setup on this car that I've done is I have put a Amz Diff in the back, and if you can see that little hole there, I have done that so that I can use, just bear with me a second, just grabbing this little key. This little key here goes into there, and then I can turn the wheel and tighten or loosen the diff. And that's because the standard diff that came with this, I'll just find it, was a locked diff. Now, I'll go into why I changed it in a moment. But the real test with these cars is the handling. So I set them both up at 94mm. Both of them have got similar weight. Let's try and weigh that weighing again. So with no batteries, just the chassis, about 110 grams for the DRZ, 130 grams for the HDG1. Now that has got a metal gyro. I think it probably makes about 5 gram difference, maybe 10 grams, but it is overall made of metal, so that is why it'll be heavier. The real acid test for both of these cars is a really polished, shiny, smooth floor. Then your settings become critical if you want to get the car to drift. And that's where I did the testing that is in the footage earlier. So on a more textured surface, both of them are pretty easy to set up to drift. And like I said, I try and get the wheels parallel to each other, so we don't want them towing in or towing out. Same for the back, and we don't want them cambering in too much, too far in, too far out. With the steering, you can a little bit, but it depends on the type of wheels you've got. So I've got Mini Z drift tyres on here, so they're the same. And apart from that, I've tried to keep everything a constant. Now, I can't speak for the gearing on this one. I haven't looked that deeply, but overall, it's a similar setup. And what I found was that the DRZ is just that little bit sweeter handling. So in terms of what would I want to race if I was doing a drift race, probably the DRZ. Now, if you've got this car out there, I'm not saying it's bad. Maybe my skill set isn't there with drift cars to tune this as nicely, but so far I found the DRZ to be better. And you can tell by looking at the construction of it, the detail that goes into all the parts, all the washers, all the shims that you have to put in to get everything set up, and the adjustability. Now, there is one adjustment that this one has at the back that the DRZ doesn't have, and that's the ability to tow in, tow out the rear wheels just by changing the lengths here. You can't do that on the DRZ. The wishbones are pretty much fixed unless, nope, unless I'm mistaken. No, you can't. Okay, so not that I think with a drift car you really need to. Now, I was going to mention the diff earlier. So this car came with a locked diff, which is fine on a textured surface. But what I found is on the really slippy surfaces, this diff is a atomic diff, and actually came out of the box pretty loose. I didn't have to do anything with it. It didn't need running in, and I find that works better on the really smooth surfaces. So I did the same with this diff. I opened it up, so you can hear that's pretty smooth. But if I need to, I can lock it up just to demonstrate or for different surfaces. So if I get a chance, I will lock the diff up and show you how it performs differently on the shiny surface. It just makes the car flick around more uncontrollably on a smooth surface. Once you lose the back end, it keeps going. Whereas with the open diff, I can actually just adjust the throttle slightly in the steering and carry on drifting. Whereas with the lock diff, you've got no chance. I think the power just comes on too strong and the car just swings around. That's the main difference that I did on the back of this one, is put the Amz Diff in. It just makes more adjustability, and I do love the fact you can get to the diff very easily to adjust it. Downside to that is you get a lot of fluff and dust in there. So in terms of the actual suspension setup, obviously the DRZ has got real shocks, but this isn't bad. It's pretty good. I mean, as with anything with these cars, if you're racing, I think your driving skills are going to be the ultimate decider if the cars are set up fairly well. The other thing I found was, this being a Banggood or a Mini Q ES brushless ESC, it's not as smooth as the atomic one. The atomic one costs a little bit more. I think it costs double actually. I think these are about 15, 20 pounds and these are about 30 pounds, something like that. But it is far, far smoother. One thing that let me down on this car is the programming box for this. I have got somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So the auto brake was on. Every time I let go of the throttle, the back end locks up. That didn't do it any favors, especially if you're mid-drift. So overall, they've both got their pluses and their minuses. This one definitely is the sweeter car to drive, okay? So if you want the best handling, the absolute best, the pinnacle, this is the one to go for. If you want something that you can adjust the chassis length on and is easier to build, and I have to say, it looks pretty durable. I have the parts fitted together really well, and this car is well made. I've got no criticism of how it went together. My only issue with Banggood is that there were no bearings at the back. I had to take them out of a WL. And obviously no instructions either. Those things aside, I did have to use some washers to prop up the chassis plate at the front here. And that was because I had to use an atomic servo, because that was all I had to hand. And the atomic servo was the horn. Look, let's do this properly. If you see there, the servo horn was hitting the top of the chassis plate, so I had to use some washers to prop it up. Now you might be wondering what this drop of glue was for. When I was setting the car up, I tried different counterbalances to see what would make it drive better. And in the end, with lots of messing about, I managed to get it working just fine without any weight balances. So I haven't used any weight counterbalances. I have got underneath here Velcro, so I can move these up and down. The whole chassis plate with this section slides back. That's why I've put them there. When you increase or decrease the wheelbase, this whole bit moves backwards and forwards with the rear wheels. Okay, so in terms of what I think of the construction of the cars, they're both pretty good. I mean, I've run this for nearly a year now, and it's been bashed around our track, and I've had nothing break on it. So even though there's no metal parts on it, I think that being that little bit lighter does benefit it. Now, one of the benefits no one mentions with these rear-wheel drive cars that they both are really good for is battery life. I can put one stick pack in these, and it lasts 2 or 3, even 4 races, I think even 5 races. Whereas I'd be changing them on an all-wheel drive like the AMZ just because it only turns the rear wheels. Now, if you watch the footage I've got from when they were racing against an all-wheel drive, these actually hold their own. We've managed lap times of 8 seconds, which is pretty good. I think we've managed almost below 8, and it is really a different driving style altogether. And you can only see that when you watch the footage of the it's one of the earlier videos I posted of the DRZ up against I think it's up against an SZ and maybe a WL Toys, but you can see that it manages to hold its own. I think the only other thing that I really want to mention with these cars is you have to spend some time setting them up. I think I spent the best part of a day trying to tune the suspension, the wheel setups to get it to drift properly. I think I actually gave up trying to drift the DRZ last year on the really shiny surface because I had it set up to run on the track, and it was just too much work to try and get it to balance out. That said, I'll quote a line that someone else said on one of the, Mr. Beaver actually said in one of his videos, drifting a rear-wheel drive car, it just feels special. It just feels really special, and you can just spend hours drifting it and watching the counter steer and watching the car swerve and playing with the throttle and just getting the feel of it. It's kind of an opposite way of driving to the all-wheel drives. They're completely different because all 4 wheels spin. It just is a completely different ball game, and yeah, it's very satisfying. So certainly in the footage that I've included so far, you can see that I had a lot of fun playing around with these. Ultimately, which car should you buy? And I think it really comes down to if you want to change the wheelbase. I think otherwise it's fairly similar. You know, if I was honest, I'd say I prefer my DRZ. I like atomic cars, but I have got great respect for this car here. It did pretty well, and okay, it costs a little bit more. Now, actually, here's something I can show you straight away that bugs me about this car. Right, sorry, I nearly forgot this. So you can see here we've got this Kingpin style steering, right? Can you see there the ball joint is locked? So you can have that happening if you're not careful, then it locks in and it won't slide properly. Now I'm gonna have to clip this to, there we go, that's how it's supposed to be. Little things like that, and obviously the slop that's everywhere in these wheels. Now I'm sure there'll be some hop-ups we can use to improve that. Okay, let's crack back to some footage of the cars drifting and see what you guys think. So this is probably the 6th edition to this video I've done as I've been testing this car all week. And as a final note, I wasn't quite happy with the car with the silver GTR shell. The HGD1 just, wasn't as sweet. So in that footage you saw, I switched it back to earlier on to the 90mm Rx7, the yellow body. I changed the wheels, the rear ones to wide and the front ones to narrow. And I also changed the radio gear. This is the biggest difference. I put in the Radio Link RC4GS with the combined gyro, and I got rid of the metal gyro that I had, the Oniski, Siki, or however you pronounce it, gyro, the black metal one. I also found the tuning box, the programming card for this EEC, and decreased the initial punch, and played around with the drag braking and turned it off. All these settings transformed this car, and it is now brilliant to handle and drive and very sweet. So yeah, little thing, this is what I love about Mini RC. You can write a car off, and then with the right settings, suddenly it becomes amazing. So I'd still prefer my DRZ overall, but there's a lot in this package that you get for your money. The fact that you can adjust the wheelbase, that it's so easy to set up, so easy to build. It's a very simple build on this car. And overall, yeah, it's a welcome addition to the collection. So if you want an adjustable rear-wheel drive Mini RC drift car, I think this Banggood car is pretty good, a good buy. If you want the best, then spend extra money and get the Super Skeeter chassis for the DRZ, and then you can do the same. So that's just a quick addition, a final round off, and I'll see you guys next time. Please like and subscribe for more Mini RC videos, and hopefully I'll have another one coming out to you pretty soon.